I hope I have managed to convince you about the importance of the HR analytics role in each and every organization. So before we begin about the kind of analytics that you could create within the HR function, let's talk about a little bit more briefly about the kinds of analytics that exist. What I will do is I will take an example of a manufacturing plant and use that to illustrate these four different kinds of analytical metrics. So let's start off with descriptive. This is the most basic and obvious types of metrics that you can create. And let's say that you are looking at the kind of productivity of the various employees within a manufacturing plant. An example of a descriptive stat would be the average productivity per employee of that manufacturing plant. So essentially, what this word means is that you are literally describing the state of what is. And it is this description which, when given the shape of numbers, becomes a statistical metric. And this is something which is, I think, most easy to do. Given the huge amount of data that you have access to, you can create a wide number of descriptive stats, and that will help the business owner quickly look at maybe a single screen and see how a certain plant is doing. So this is your basic and first level of analytics that you can prepare in your function. Now let's move on to the next stage of analytics, and this is diagnostic stats. So in the previous stat, I created the average productivity per employee. Now, once I know the average, I know that I can benchmark each and every individual to this average. And what will happen is that there will be some people who are quite high above the average and they are performing exceedingly well. And we will call these as our top performers. Or statistically, you could say these are my outliers on the positive end. And you might have a few employees who are doing much worse than the average. And you might say these are your underperformers, or they are your outliers at the negative end of the spectrum. So now we are in this space where we are not just looking at the description of what is, but we are slightly slicing and going a little bit deeper and trying to diagnose what is the problem here. Why are my underperformers underperforming? Could it be that I'm able to correlate this with, let's say, a shift timing, and we find that people who are working the night shift for, let's say, 3 months or more tend to constantly underperform compared to people who are only in the night shift for, let's say, 6 weeks. So now I'm able to diagnose a problem. And once I know what is causing an underperformance, perhaps I can predict what I need to do in order to create an overall higher average for the plant. So basis my diagnosis, it will tell me what is causing a certain problem. And all diagnosis need not be about a problem, but I could also diagnose the reasons for overperformance. So I might find that all employees who've undergone a certain training are tending to perform better than my average. And now I can predict that if most of my employees undergo a similar training, perhaps my average for the entire plant will increase by 10%. So I create these predictions basis my diagnostics, and using these different metrics, now I can prescribe either a new training program for all my employees within this plant and perhaps all the plants that this company owns, or I can prescribe a slight modification in the way shift timings are organized and a new policy which prevents people from spending more than 6 to 8 weeks in the night shift. So I set up a new policy to rotate my people. And these are the kind of interventions that I can now design once I have a lot more stats at my disposal to drive these questions in my mind and then be able to create these possible solutions and see where I can make the most non-disruptive interventions for the maximum possible result. And that's not all. That's not where the role of analytics ends. because what you will realize is that this is actually a circle. So you will maybe make an intervention, but like we discussed earlier, this is a process of continuous intervention and continuous improvement. So you will prescribe a new policy and then create again new descriptive stats and see how this policy has really behaved. And has it really been able to meet what you were expecting this change to create? And then you can modify your policy and make sure that you are not just stuck in a rut where you've taken a decision and now you're no longer open to changing it. And because all of these inputs are data driven, therefore, all of your decisions and your changes can also be a lot more scientific and thought through in their nature.